They took my name off the plaque while I was still holding the scissors for the ribbon. You know those big ceremonial ones? Bright and ridiculous? I stood there on the steps of the Harbor Works Makerspace, the building my husband and I renovated with our retirement money, smiling for photos, and watched a volunteer climb a little ladder and slide the brass plate that read Founders, Harold and Miriam Adler, into a velvet bag like he was cleaning up the silver after dinner. New branding, Trevor whispered, the way people tell a child that the dog has gone to a farm. Nora, my daughter, stepped to the microphone and announced a transition of stewardship, her voice steady, rehearsed. Then she placed a folder in my hands and asked me to sign a gift agreement so the donors would be comfortable. Comfortable with what, pretending I had vanished? I was 71 and had taught half this coastal town to read when our library still smelled like newsprint. I had worked as a bookkeeper for the fishing co-op, balanced their books to the penny while men with raw, salt-bitten hands thanked me with jars of smoked salmon. But there I was, tucked to the side of my own front row seat, nodding politely while my son-in-law explained why entity governance meant the founders' names would confuse funders and why the gift agreement would tidy up legacy issues. In the second row, our pastor, Pastor Craig, gave me a soft, supportive smile. He had been the one who'd sent Trevor to that trusted financial planner, the one who charged very normal fees. The folder felt heavier than paper should. The first page was clean, titled with a flourish. The second had clauses in a forest of small print. The room buzzed. Someone handed me a pen dressed in rhinestones. Mom, Nora murmured, smoothing a strand of hair behind my ear like I was a child with jam on my cheek. This just makes everything simpler. She slid the mic aside, leaned in, and added, we can't keep answering questions about your capacity. My capacity. That word traveled through me like cold water. I glanced down at the paper and saw a paragraph about a non-revocable, unconditional donation, a line about consenting to the removal of any commemorative signage, and a line I didn't understand, acknowledges forthcoming guardianship proceedings. I looked up and saw my neighbor, Anita, the retired notary who walks her dachshund past my porch every morning, frowning just a little at the stage. I smiled at my daughter, folded the folder closed, and put it on my lap. Then I kept smiling as the camera flashes popped. When the photographs made their way to social media that night, my face looked calm. The only tell was my fingers pressed white to the spine of that folder. I slept with the thing under my pillow like a bad fairy tale. When I woke before dawn, I made tea, opened the folder again, and found, tucked behind the gift agreement, a photocopy of a check payable to Cliffside Advisory LLC, signed by Trevor, memo line, church fund arrangement. I had never heard of a church fund arrangement. Anita, I thought. I needed Anita, and maybe the branch manager at the credit union who once told me, gently, that my son-in-law's attempts to add his name for convenience to my account were not appropriate. By noon, I had an appointment with legal aid, and by evening I had an answer to the question I hadn't wanted to ask. The gift agreement was a trap, and the guardianship they were hinting at would trigger the rest of it like dominoes. I held my thumb over Trevor's name on that check and stared until the ink blurred. And then I called Anita. She picked up on the second ring and said, without any greeting at all, do not sign a single thing until I come by. You know humiliation when it happens in a grocery line. The woman with the stacked coupons 2 places ahead of me, the checker, the bagger, they all heard Nora say, too loudly, Mom, we need to talk about the stove situation. She'd turned the volume up to concerned daughter so strangers could bear witness. The stove? I asked, holding my basket with both hands. The basket held tea, apples, a bag of flour, and the last small luxuries I allowed myself, a jar of the lemon curd they sell at the farmer's market and a paperback from the spinner rack because the library is digital now and the screens give me headaches. You left it on, she said. Trevor found it. It's a safety issue. Her eyes flicked to the checker, who had paused with a carton of eggs in his hand. We're just trying to keep her safe, Nora announced, which is the kind of sentence that ends with your keys disappearing. We talked to Pastor Craig, she continued, and he recommended a great senior community near church. Very supportive. And he connected us with a financial advisor who specializes in care planning for elders. He says if we get guardianship, we can protect you from predatory schemes. Predatory schemes, I repeated. In my basket, the lemon curd gleamed like an inside joke. The checker set the eggs down as if we were defusing a bomb. There were more moments like that. A committee meeting at church where a woman from the quilting circle leaned over and whispered, "We're all here for you," as if I had announced a terminal illness. The HOA meeting where Trevor stood up and declared that he and Nora would be managing my property taxes from now on to avoid liens, and the president nodded, pleased to delegate, while she asked me to bring cookies next time. The group text where my grandson Lucas, 12, sent a heart and Nora responded with a thumbs up, and I typed, erased, and finally sent a sticker of a lighthouse, because sometimes a person's dignity is a lighthouse in rough weather, quietly doing its job. I hadn't forgotten that check in the folder. At legal aid, a young attorney with kind eyes looked at the photocopy, then at the gift agreement, and explained the rule of the world I was stepping into. If I signed the gift, I would divest assets in a way that could complicate care later. If they pursued guardianship and a court found I needed one, I would lose the right to make financial and medical decisions. Guardianship is necessary sometimes, she said, but it's also misused. We see a lot of financial exploitation, especially when a family member is also a business manager. She asked me if I had a power of attorney. I had an old one that named my husband. It expired with him. She asked if I had a trust. I did, a revocable trust herald, and I set up years ago. I had never fully understood the B clause he joked about, the one he called our belt and suspenders. Bring it, she said. Bring everything. Then she added, and get a second set of eyes at the bank. A teller who knows you. We'll need a timeline. When I met with the credit union manager, he pulled my signature cards from the back office and showed me an attempted addition form, exactly as I suspected, with Trevor's neat, insistent handwriting. He said it was a convenience account, the manager told me. But your account's not set up that way. The flag helped we called you, but your phone sent us to voicemail. That was the day Trevor had turned off my phone by accident and then took 24 hours to get it sorted. I could feel my pulse in my temples. At home, my porch steps had a little square package tucked beneath the fern, a Wi-Fi doorbell my neighbor's teenage niece had installed for me when she was practicing for her comp sci class. I turned it on. If anyone used my key during the day, I wanted to know. That night, I slept again with the folder under my pillow. And in the morning, when Nora knocked on my door and fanned a brochure for Cliffside Elder Suites, I told her I would move in with her for a trial period to see what help feels like. I said it as softly as I could. Her eyes fluttered with relief. Agreeing to be a burden on my terms was the opening I needed. I packed a small suitcase, the way I used to pack for conferences, wool cardigan, 2 blouses, a pair of slacks that don't wrinkle, the photo of Harold and me from 1978 where he looks like he's just told a joke he shouldn't have. I left the doorbell camera on and the porch light off. Before I handed Nora my key, I asked to take a picture of it so I remember the shape when I cut a spare. She rolled her eyes and took the key back immediately. A small thing, but people tell on themselves with small things. That first night in their guest room, I lay awake, counting the hums of their refrigerator like rosary beads. Trevor was on the phone late, pacing. Twice he said, "No, the guardianship hearing will be straightforward, Pastor Craig will testify." The next morning, Nora had me sign a healthcare directive at the kitchen table so doctors know who to call. I read every line and signed because the directive was fine, specific to medical emergencies. Then she slid over a digital pad and said, "And this just authorizes Trevor to handle the Makerspace accounts while you rest." I looked at the language. Limited agency for Harbor Works operating account. I smiled and took a photo of the screen before signing. "For my records," I said. She rolled her eyes again like a tired mother. She forgets I taught records. At legal aid that afternoon, the lawyer leaned over my phone and zoomed in on the limited agency terms. "This is cleverly worded," she said. "It's supposed to look like a minimum scope, but see these words, any derivative account and any affiliate account. That's a door. We built a plan around doors." We updated my trust quietly. The B clause had been Harold's belt and suspenders if a court ever attempted to place me under guardianship without clear and convincing medical evidence from two independent physicians. The trust would freeze transfers to any entity in which the petitioner held an interest. I had to laugh a little, a sad, proud laugh. Harold always thought of a second lock. Then we created a new durable power of attorney, naming the legal aid clinic's fiduciary arm as my agent for financial matters. It would sit in a sealed envelope unless I said so. The lawyer explained I could also file a pre-need guardian declaration, naming a professional, not family, should I ever truly need one. We drafted it, I signed it in Anita's kitchen, and Anita notarized it with the same brisk competence she applies to her crosswords. I started gathering evidence the way I used to gather late books, politely, persistently, assuming the system would work if you kept feeding it facts. The doorbell camera caught Trevor unlocking my front door at 11:36 a.m. on a Tuesday when Nora and I were at the salon where she insisted my haircut would make me feel refreshed. The camera caught him leaving with a banker's box and a bundle of file folders under his arm. 2 hours later, my credit union called about attempted online access from a new device. We shut it down. The next day, I baked a pie I didn't want and took it to Pastor Craig because my mother taught me that you can knock on any door if you bring something warm. He invited me in, smiled at the smell of cinnamon, and told me to trust the process. On his bookshelf, I saw a little crystal award from Cliffside Advisory for community partnerships. A plaque for a plaque, I thought, and asked, is Cliffside the same firm that handles our church endowment? He paused half a beat too long and then said, they're generous to the church. The pie cooled on my sleeve. Small victories came with small bruises. My grandson, Lucas, slipped a note into my cardigan pocket. I know you didn't leave the stove on. Trevor turns it on for his tea and forgets. Nora began closing doors when I walked in, silencing her phone. The church newsletter printed a kindly paragraph about our beloved Miriam transitioning to a supportive home life as if I'd had a public fall. At the Makerspace, a volunteer whispered that the new donation page had a second button, Donor Advised Fund, that routed gifts through Cliffside's platform. They say it's normal, she said, but donors are confused. Then the folder under my pillow vanished. I had tucked it into my suitcase behind the cardigans. Now it was gone. Trevor said he had moved it for safekeeping. It should have felt like a defeat. Instead, it felt like confirmation. I texted Anita, missing folder. She responded with a single sentence, we're ready for company. I told Nora I'd attend the Makerspace Gala even if my name was no longer on the wall. She looked relieved, as if I were finally choosing compliance. I was choosing a stage. The gala smelled like rented linens and catered salmon. The Harbor Works hall glowed under strings of Edison bulbs. Our town loves to perform its own charm. Donors clustered at cocktail tables under banners that read Innovate and Build. A slideshow cycled through photos of teenagers soldering little robots and retirees learning CAD software. We stand on the shoulders of those who gave us this home, the MC said, and flashed a photo of me and Harold that faded into the next chapter. That was when Pastor Craig placed a hand on my elbow, gentle but firm, and guided me to the edge of the stage. We'll have you bless the meal, he said. Blessings are a kind of clerical duct tape. They cover everything. Before I could say a word, Trevor took the microphone and began to thank sponsors. He thanked Cliffside Advisory with a flourish and raised his glass. Their donor platform doubled our giving, he said. The projector switched to a screenshot of the platform, and for a moment, there it was, tiny print at the bottom right. Processing fee, 9.0% plus advisory retainer, 9%. Small-town people notice pennies. I saw Anita tilt her head like a carriage clock. The MC nodded to me to come forward and give the blessing. I did. I thanked the donors, invoked Harold's habit of fixing everything with baling wire and patience, asked for steady hands for the kids who would build things here, and then said, before we eat, I have 3 thank yous of my own. My voice didn't shake. Age gifts you that. First, I said, to the credit union for calling me on Tuesday at 1:38 p.m. when a new device tried to access my account. Second, to the legal aid attorney who helped me read the small print because my eyes aren't what they used to be. And third, to the quietest people in the room who notice everything: the tellers, the bookkeepers, the cashiers, and the Anitas. The room rustled. Names or spells? There are things I need to show you. I looked at Trevor. He smiled without his eyes and glanced at Pastor Craig. People like to triangulate confidence. Anita stood from a back table, holding a little stack of papers like hymnals. She approached the stage and, with the efficiency of a parade marshal, handed copies to the MC. They went up on the screen. The check for church fund arrangement to Cliffside Advisory, the limited agency form with those 2 words underlined, any affiliate, the doorbell camera still of Trevor entering my house and leaving with a box. The room made the sound a crowd makes when it sees a baby stumble, an inhale that's not sure whether it's a gasp. Trevor took the mic. "Miriam is confused," he said lightly. "We've all been worried. That's why Pastor and I filed for temporary guardianship." The word guardianship changed the air. You could feel the donors pull back, their bodies calculating risk. "About that," I said, and nodded toward the aisle. A woman in a navy suit, Thomason from Legal Aid, walked to the front like she was finding her seat, except she lifted a folder. "The court denied the ex parte request this afternoon," she said, calm as a lake, "because Ms. Adler filed a pre-need guardian declaration and provided 2 letters from independent physicians affirming capacity. Also because of the trust clause that freezes any transfer to entities in which petitioners have a financial interest." She said it like a librarian reading the rules about overdue fines. You may not like them, but here we are. Someone in the back, one of the teenagers, whispered, "Whoa." It rippled like gossip. I clicked to the next slide. "Here's the part one didn't want to believe," I said. "Pastor Craig recommended Cliffside to us, said they were generous to the church." And they are. Cliffside pays the church a partnership honorarium, 5% of any fees paid by their referrals. That includes the 9% processing fees from this platform. I let the math sit there. And the generous endowment they built for the church is invested in a fund managed by Cliffside's own affiliate. Those 2 words again. Pastor Craig stepped forward, color rising along his collar. "We did nothing illegal," he said, which is a strange sentence when nobody has accused you of a crime. "I didn't say illegal," I said. "I said hidden." Then I nodded again, toward the side door. The real ally, the one who had kept his silence until now, walked in, Carter, the church accountant who barely speaks above a murmur. He carried a ledger and a memory like a safe. He went to the microphone as if it were a telephone and said, without flourish, "We received a $12,000 honorarium from Cliffside tied to Harbor Works referrals, paid to the church's discretionary fund, authorized by pastor and treasurer. I resigned last week. I told Miriam I would answer any questions publicly because I was told not to. Now I have." The room's inhale became an exhale that sounded like judgment. I clicked again. A text thread filled the screen. "Trevor to Nora, get her to sign the gift agreement at the gala. It triggers the platform migration. Cliffside runs everything. Then we can handle Mom's house too." The timestamp matched the afternoon when Nora had found me in the grocery line and lectured me about stoves. In the front row, Lucas covered his face with his hands. He shifted, then straightened, then took his hands down. He was 12, and he was going to decide who he was in this moment for the rest of his life. Trevor reached for the mic. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. Nora stepped beside him, eyes shiny with a grief that had nothing to do with death and everything to do with losing control. "Mom, we were trying to help," she whispered. She meant it. That nearly undid me. "Help looks like transparency," I said. "Help does not look like sneaking my folder out of my suitcase while I sleep in your house. Help does not look like filing in secret for guardianship and reorganizing a nonprofit's funding structure to make it easier to move money in circles." My voice stayed quiet. I was not the thunder in a courtroom drama. I was a tide that keeps coming. The board chair cleared her throat. "We'll recess," she announced, but nobody moved. Then the quietest person moved again, Carter, holding up his ledger like a lantern. "We can keep going," he said. And that was the moment the room decided who they were. Donors set down their forks. Volunteers crossed their arms. The MC lowered the mic to his side, suddenly a man without a script. In the pause, Anita took the velvet bag with my plaque out of her tote, held it up, and smiled at me. "I believe this belongs to you," she said. Trevor's face became the face of someone doing math with consequences. Nora's hand loosened from his sleeve. Lucas stood up. "Grandma," he said, in a voice that had to push through 2 years of learning how to be quiet, "can I come home with you tonight?" The fallout was not dramatic. It was administrative, which is its own form of justice. The board suspended Trevor, then removed him as treasurer within a week, installing an interim manager from a regional nonprofit. They moved donations off Cliffside's platform and published the new fee schedule on the front page. Pastor Craig took a leave. The denomination sent in a regional overseer who handled it with some mercy and a lot of paperwork. Carter returned to close the books, then left again, this time with a standing ovation. He now keeps the books for 3 small arts organizations that pay him less than he deserves and call him at home for advice anyway. The court formalized what the audience had already decided: no guardianship. My preneed declaration went on file. The trust's B clause did what Harold intended. It froze any obligation to entities with conflicts for 90 days while neutrality was verified. Cliffside sent a letter that sounded like apology, but was spelled like settlement. The church returned the honorarium and announced that future referral relationships would be disclosed. The gift agreement found its way back to my kitchen table, where I used it as a test sheet for fountain pens before I fed it, finally, to the shredder. As for my family, there's no clean line you cross and then become different people. Nora apologized, but not all at once. It came in little bits, the way snow slides off the edge of a roof in heaps and then in crumbs. She came over on a Tuesday and said, "I thought I was protecting you." Another time she said, "I thought the platform was just efficient." She bought me a new kettle and installed a stove alarm that beeps after an hour. I kept it because sometimes you accept a small thing when a person has not yet figured out how to give you a big one. She started counseling with someone who did not attend our church. Trevor left town quietly. He texted Lucas a lot of promises and not many plans. I do not know if he learned anything. Some people mistake consequences for unluckiness. I said yes when Lucas asked to come home for a week, then a month. We signed him up for the Saturday soldering class at Harbor Works, which now has a scholarship in Harold's name for kids whose parents work nights. I gave a talk on the rules of money in plain English with a whiteboard and markers, what derivative account means, what a convenience account is not, what donor advised does, and why any affiliate is a red flag. The teenagers looked bored until I showed them how to read a fee schedule. Then they leaned in and took notes like I was explaining magic. I also started something I had wanted to do for years, but kept pushing aside: a Wednesday night adult literacy circle at the library. We sit in a rectangle of chairs. We read aloud badly and bravely. We celebrate every page. When my hands shake, it's from the coffee, not from the fear of being erased. Sometimes Carter drops by with ledgers to show the class how numbers tell stories. Sometimes Anita brings her dachshund, who snores so loudly that we laugh and have to start sentences over. I do not make speeches about lessons. People don't grow from speeches. They grow from seeing exactly how a choice leads to a consequence. At the next Makerspace Gala, the plaque hung back in its place. Not as an idol to me and Harold, but as a promise of accountability. Founders, Harold and Miriam Adler. Beside it, a small new one. People who notice. At the end of that evening, after the plates had been cleared and Lucas and I were folding tablecloths, Nora reached up and pressed her fingers against the brass. Then she turned and put her palm flat against my cardigan, over my sternum. It was not a dramatic hug. It was a punctuation mark. I let it sit there, warm and ordinary, and I stayed still long enough for her to be the one to step back. Harold used to say that a good knot is the kind you can untie. The trust he built for me was a knot like that. And my life, the parts other people tried to thicken into a tangle, has slowly thinned into lines I can follow, to my porch light, to the path between the library and the makerspace. to the table where Lucas and I solder crooked little circuits into blinking constellations. On clear nights, the lighthouse throws its slow beam across the harbor, the same way it has since before any of us were born, sweeping the dark like a hand looking for something it dropped. I stand at my window and wait for it to pass over my house, and I ask myself what I'm willing to notice tomorrow that I missed today. That's the question I leave you with, friend, because the quiet people, the ones who notice, save more of us than we'll ever know.